In the heart of the dense jungle, there was a forest known only to locals as Whispering Woods. People believed it was haunted, but few dared to talk about it. Legend had it that anyone who entered the woods at night would hear whispers calling their name. A group of friends decided to challenge the myth. They ventured deep into the forest after sunset, armed with only their flashlights. As the sun disappeared, the forest grew unnaturally silent. Suddenly, they began to hear faint whispers, at first indistinct, but then more clear. Each of them heard their names, as if the voices knew them. Panic set in when one of the friends, Rohan, disappeared without a sound. The group frantically searched for him, but the whispers grew louder and closer. They followed the sounds, hoping it would lead to Rohan. Instead, they found an old, abandoned cabin with eerie symbols painted on the walls. The door creaked open by itself, revealing a dark, musty interior. Inside, they saw Rohan standing motionless, his face blank, his eyes staring into nothingness. His lips moved, whispering something they couldn't understand. One by one, they felt something cold touch their shoulders, something unseen. Before they could react, the whispers engulfed them. The next morning, the villagers found their lifeless bodies in the middle of the forest, eyes wide open, with only one thing on their lips: whispers. Ananya and her husband had just moved into their dream home, a large, old-fashioned house in a quiet neighborhood. But from the moment they moved in, something felt off. The air was cold, and there were strange noises at night. At first, it was just creaks and taps, which they dismissed as the house settling. One evening, Ananya was home alone. As she prepared dinner, she heard footsteps in the hallway behind her. Assuming it was her husband, she called out, but there was no answer. When she turned, the hallway was empty. Moments later, the lights began to flicker. A loud scream echoed from upstairs, making her heart race. Terrified, she ran to the bedroom where the scream had come from, but the room was empty. She noticed, however, that the mirror on the wall had a strange crack, as if someone had hit it from the inside. As she stared at her reflection, the image warped. She saw something standing behind her, a dark, shadowy figure, its eyes glowing red. Suddenly, her husband burst through the door, and the figure disappeared. They called a priest, but he refused to enter, saying the house was cursed. The next night, they were awakened by a loud banging on the walls, the sound of nails scratching on the floor, and a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. They fled, leaving everything behind. No one has lived in that house since, but late at night, neighbors claim to hear the same screams and the sound of footsteps wandering through the empty rooms. In a quiet neighborhood, there was a garden that no one visited. It was once beautiful, with vibrant flowers and towering trees, but now it stood neglected, overgrown with weeds. The locals said the garden was cursed. Long ago, the woman who owned it disappeared mysteriously, and since then, strange things had been happening there. One day, a curious boy named Rahul snuck into the garden, eager to explore its dark corners. As soon as he stepped inside, he felt a chill, even though it was a warm day. The air seemed heavy, and the garden felt much larger on the inside than it looked from the outside. He wandered through the tall grass, his footsteps muffled by the thick vegetation. Suddenly, he heard a faint humming sound, like a lullaby. Following the sound, he reached a small pond at the center of the garden. The water was dark, almost black, and in its reflection, he saw the shadow of a woman standing behind him. When he turned, no one was there. Panic set in as the garden seemed to come alive. The branches of the trees twisted like skeletal hands reaching for him. The ground beneath him began to sink, as if something was pulling him down. Desperate, Rahul tried to run, but the garden wouldn't let him leave. Vines wrapped around his legs, and the shadowy figure from the pond began to take shape in front of him. He screamed for help, but his voice was swallowed by the garden. Days later, his parents found his shoes at the entrance, but Rahul was never seen again. The garden continues to grow, hiding secrets in its depths, and some say that at night, you can still hear Rahul's cries echoing from within.